Welcome to Creepy Vibes. School lockdowns are terrifying enough, but these real-life accounts from Texas schools will leave you with chills. Prepare to be glued to your seat as we uncover the truth behind these terrifying events. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now. Because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. It happened on a Tuesday. Not that the day mattered much, except that Tuesdays were when Mr. Delgado handed out detention slips like Halloween candy. The wind was already weird that morning, hot, dusty, blowing in from the Franklin Mountains, like it was chasing something. Chaparral Middle School sat squat and square in East El Paso, like a concrete shoebox dropped on the desert. No trees, no shade, just sun-scorched sidewalks and a blacktop that shimmered in the heat. The morning started like any other. Kids slouched through metal detectors. The front office buzzed with printers and lukewarm coffee. Then, sometime just after second period, the voice came over the intercom. "This is a lockdown. I repeat, this is a lockdown. Teachers, please follow procedure." That was it. No warning, no explanation. Just the kind of dry, deadpan voice you'd expect from a nurse reading your blood pressure. In room 112, Mrs. Alvarez did exactly what she was trained to do. She locked the door, covered the window, turned off the lights. All 27 students scrambled to the corner, huddled by the bookshelf like rats waiting out a flood. Among them was Mateo Diaz. Mateo wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't popular. He wasn't much of anything, really. A quiet 8th grader with thick glasses and a backpack covered in old sci-fi patches. A good kid. Always had a library book under his arm. Always said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir." The kind of kid who didn't get noticed until he was gone. At first, no one realized anything was wrong. They sat in the dark, breathing shallow, checking phones that buzzed with confused texts from parents. "Are you okay? What's going on? Turn off your ringer." Then, 22 minutes in, Mrs. Alvarez took attendance in a whisper. She stopped cold. Her pen tapped the paper. "Mateo?" she whispered. No answer. She looked over. The little space where he'd been crouched, right beside the pencil sharpener, was empty. She blinked. He'd been there when the lockdown started. She remembered him helping Caroline move her water bottle. She remembered his knees up to his chest, arms wrapped tight. But now, nothing. There was nowhere to go. The windows were locked. The classroom door hadn't opened once. No one had even breathed too loud. Mrs. Alvarez's face went pale. She whispered his name again. The other kids began to look around too. Then came the ripple of cold fear. He was gone. When the lockdown ended 47 minutes later, the police swept through, as they always did. The school's resource officer, Mr. Taft, double-checked every classroom. The principal walked around trying to look calm. Parents flooded in like a tidal wave, grabbing their kids and pushing past the front desk. Mateo Diaz never came out. First, they thought he'd snuck out, run away, maybe slipped into the hallway during the chaos. But the security footage told a different story. He'd entered the room at 10:02 a.m. You could see him walk in, give a shy nod to Mrs. Alvarez, sit down, and unzip his backpack. He was there, but he never left. No footage showed him leaving the building. No one saw him in the halls. No doors opened, no windows, no alarms. It was like he'd been swallowed whole by the air itself. Police were called, dogs were brought in, news vans camped out front for 2 straight days. But there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no trace of him anywhere. His backpack sat untouched by the bookshelf, one strap twisted like he'd set it down quickly. Then it got weirder. The janitor, Mr. Romero, swore he heard breathing in the supply closet near room 112, 2 days after the lockdown. Said it was soft, slow, and steady, like someone hiding. But when he opened the door, nothing. Just buckets, mops, and bleach. He swore the air was colder in there, though, and that he heard someone whisper his name just as he left. One of the substitute teachers, an older lady who'd only worked that one day, quit mid-week. Said she couldn't be in that hallway anymore. Said every time she passed room 112, she heard scratching. When asked why she hadn't reported it sooner, she said, because it wasn't on the door. It was under the floor. Mateo's mom never stopped looking. She stood outside the school every morning with a candle and a picture of her boy. Every night she left the porch light on. Said he'd find his way back if it stayed lit. In April, 3 months later, a 7th grader named Aaron Gutierrez had a breakdown in the hallway near room 112. He screamed, collapsed, and said someone had grabbed his ankle from the floor vent. Said it was cold, too cold, and it whispered something like, "I'm still here." The school replaced the vents after that, had the whole wing remodeled, but the room was never used again. Not really. The new principal said it was under evaluation for structural issues, but teachers knew. They talked about how the lights flickered when they passed that door, how the key always stuck in the lock, how once during a fire drill, a second attendance sheet printed itself on the class printer, with Mateo's name at the top in bold black letters. People don't talk about it much now. Chaparral Middle School got a fresh coat of paint and a new security system. Room 112 got a thick metal door and was converted into a storage closet. But if you walk by that hallway during the last period of the day, when the sun hits just right and the school is starting to exhale, you might hear something behind that locked door. Not loud, just the soft whisper of a boy's voice, calling for help. Or maybe calling your name. And if you listen too long, you might not leave either. Lubbock High was one of those old Texas schools that felt older than it really was. Big, brick, and built to last. It had creaking radiators in winter, ceiling fans that spun with a lazy clack in summer, and narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of pine sol, paper, and something less pleasant underneath. Most kids didn't think much about it, but there were whispers going around. Always had been. Whispers about the janitor's closet near the west stairwell on the first floor. The teachers joked about it sometimes, usually in the break room after a rough day. Said the closet was colder than the rest of the hallway, even in August. Said the light inside always buzzed too loud, flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or not. But kids? Kids said it was haunted. People remembered the old janitor, Mr. Benson. Big man with thick arms, always wore a black beanie even in the heat. He kept to himself, didn't smile much. He died in the school back in 1997. Heart attack, they said. Collapsed in the janitor's closet during 6th period, and no one found him till after school. His radio had been crackling for almost 20 minutes before someone thought to check. They found him slumped in the corner, holding onto a mop like it might help him stay up. They say he died staring at the door, eyes wide open. Since then, things in that closet haven't been right. Mr. Terrell, the janitor who came after, lasted less than a year, quit in the middle of the school day, told the principal the door locked itself from the inside, said he heard someone breathing behind him when he was in there changing a mop head. He left his cart and never came back. No one really used the closet after that. The new janitor, Mrs. Cortina, kept most of her supplies in the east wing, said the west closet gave her bad nerves. Then came the lockdown. March 12, 2019. A threat was called in around 1:43 p.m. Someone said there was a shooter near the school. Standard procedure kicked in. Doors locked, lights off, phones silent. Students huddled beneath windows, waiting, hoping. Freshman Eli Romero had been on his way back from the nurse's office. His stomach had been acting up again, nerves mostly. By the time he reached the classroom, the lockdown had already started. The door was locked. He knocked. No one answered. He was alone in the hallway. He didn't want to be in the open, so he ran. Down the side hallway, past the trophy case, past the busted vending machine that never got fixed, past the west stairwell. That's when he saw the closet door, slightly open, just a crack. He slipped inside, breathing hard. It was dark, dusty. The fluorescent light flickered overhead with a soft whine, and the air felt thick, like a room that hadn't been touched in years. He pulled the door shut and crouched behind the shelves. Then he heard the whisper. It wasn't loud, just a breath against the back of his neck, a voice that didn't belong to anyone alive. "Why'd you come in here?" Eli turned fast. The room was empty, just mops, buckets, cleaning fluid, the kind of junk you see every day in a school. But then the door creaked, not open, just a slow, flexing groan, like the door itself was breathing. He tried to open it, locked. He tried again, rattled the knob. Nothing. The whisper came again, softer now, almost sad. "Help me. I didn't finish." He froze. That voice, it wasn't his imagination. It was real. Too real. Eli backed away from the door, reaching for his phone. No signal. The light above him popped, literally popped, showering a few sparks. The room went dark. The breathing grew louder. He felt it this time, warm and wet against his ear. "You shouldn't have come in here," it said. "Now you'll stay." He screamed, pounded the door, kicked it. The lockdown ended 9 minutes later. Teachers walked out into the hall. Students stretched, joked about being scared, laughed with relief. But when they counted heads in Mrs. Velez's English class, Eli Romero was missing. They found him in the closet. But here's the thing. He wasn't hurt. Not exactly. He was sitting in the corner, knees to chest, staring blankly ahead. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond. The paramedics said he was in a dissociative state. His vitals were fine, but he wouldn't let go of the mop handle in his hands, gripped it tight, like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. When he finally did speak, 3 days later, he said the closet whispered to him, said the light watched him, said someone else was in there with him the whole time. His parents pulled him out of school after that, moved to San Antonio. The administration had the closet sealed up for safety concerns, covered the door with a metal panel, bolted it shut. But the students still talk about it. Every so often, during a fire drill or a late-night play rehearsal, someone hears something behind that wall. A soft knock, a low sigh, and sometimes, if the hallway's real quiet and you stand near that old west stairwell, you might hear a whisper float out into the hall. "Help me mop up. I didn't finish." And if you're smart, you'll keep walking. Because some closets are meant to stay closed forever. It happened in the spring of 2016 at a quiet little school in North Austin, Burnett Middle School, the kind of place where parents still waved at teachers during morning drop-off, and teachers still remembered kids by name. But sometimes, even in places like that, something slips in, something that doesn't belong. The 8th grade English class was scheduled to have a substitute that Friday. Mrs. Kimbrough had called in sick the night before. Nothing serious, just one of those late spring bugs that go around schools like whispered rumors. The office put in a sub-request like they always did, and the day rolled out like normal. Students arrived. Announcements buzzed overhead. Bells rang. No one thought it was odd when the substitute showed up. Tall, lean, with a grayish beard that looked more like dust than hair. He wore an old brown tweed jacket with elbow patches and a mustard yellow shirt buttoned all the way to the top. Didn't talk much when he came in, just nodded to the front desk lady and signed his name on the clipboard. Mr. M. Grayson. Here's the thing. That clipboard? It disappeared before the day ended. Gone. No one could explain it. He went straight to room 214, set his battered leather briefcase down on the desk, and started class, like he'd taught there 100 times before. Said his name only once, Mr. Grayson, and told the class they'd be doing silent reading. He handed out old copies of The Monkey's Paw, not printed worksheets, not something emailed from the district. Actual thin-paged books with curling covers. The kids were confused. Half of them didn't even know what a monkey's paw was. But something about the man's voice, slow and heavy, like someone dragging a chain down a hallway, made them sit and listen. That's when the room started getting cold. Not just chilly, cold. The kind that creeps in under your clothes, no matter how many layers you wear. A couple of students rubbed their arms. One girl, Leah Calderon, later said she saw her breath in the air. In May. Nobody dared complain. Mr. Grayson sat perfectly still at the desk, not reading, not grading, just watching. His eyes were pale blue, almost white, and they didn't blink much. He didn't answer questions, didn't smile, didn't even drink water. Just sat and watched. By 4th period, word had started to go around. Something about the sub just felt off. No one could explain it, but every kid who had him said the same thing. He didn't blink. Smelled weird, like they were from a basement. And he'd call kids by names he shouldn't have known. Old nicknames, stuff they only used online, or things they hadn't told anyone. One kid, Marco Torres, said Mr. Grayson looked at him and said, "How's your dog doing, Marco?" Still limping on that front leg? Marco's dog had been hit by a car the week before. He hadn't told anyone at school. Then came 6th period. It was Ms. Renner who first noticed something was wrong. She was the science teacher across the hall. Said she heard a strange humming noise coming from room 214. Not mechanical, not electrical. It sounded like chanting, low and slow, with a rhythm that made her skin crawl. She opened her door, peeked across the hall, and saw something that made her heart seize. The lights in room 214 were off, but the classroom was glowing. A faint orange-red glow, like candlelight, flickering from inside. And in the window on the door, she saw the shadow of Mr. Grayson, but it wasn't him exactly. The figure was wrong. Too tall, too thin, arms that hung too low, a head that tilted at an angle no neck should bend. She closed her door and called the office. They sent the principal, Mr. Harriman, up with a walkie-talkie. He knocked on the classroom door. No answer. He opened it anyway. Inside, the room was normal. Kids sitting in rows reading. Mr. Grayson at the desk. Lights on. But every student's face looked pale and distant, like they'd been crying. Or maybe like they'd forgotten how to blink. And Mr. Grayson, gone. Not gone from the room. Gone. Gone. The desk was empty. The briefcase was still there, but the man had vanished. No one saw him leave. No one could remember when he disappeared. The principal asked the kids what happened, but none of them would speak. Not then. The investigation came up empty. There was no record of any Mr. Grayson in the substitute system. No file, no fingerprint. The clipboard he signed vanished. The books he passed out, they weren't school-issued. In fact, the paper they were printed on didn't match anything used in the district. Old, brittle stuff, almost transparent. One copy of The Monkey's Paw was left behind. They sent it to the district. The cover looked ordinary, but the inside had no publisher, no date, just a name scribbled on the first page in old, looping handwriting. Property of M. Grayson, return before the bell tolls. They still talk about it sometimes at Burnett Middle. The kids who were in room 214, most transferred out before high school. One of them, Leah Calderon, ended up in therapy for 2 years. Told her counselor that she still dreamed about the man's face, except his eyes weren't eyes. They were keyholes. And every time she blinked in the dream, something on the other side of the keyhole blinked back. The closet in room 214 won't stay closed anymore. They've screwed it shut twice. It still pops open. And once, just once, a 7th grade sub showed up late and confused, holding a slip that said he was scheduled to teach in room 214. The slip had a name on it, written in faded red ink, Grayson. He didn't look old. He was a young guy. But when the secretary blinked, for just a split second, she swore his eyes looked cloudy white, like milk, like chalk. She told him the room was already taken. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly and walked out the front doors without another word. They never saw him again, and no one teaches in room 214 anymore. It was a Wednesday when the man showed up at Travis Ridge Middle School, right after the first bell rang. Nobody saw him come through the front doors. The front desk assistant, Mrs. Layton, didn't remember signing anyone in, and the school secretary was out sick. Still, there he was, thin, tall, pale as printer paper, with a neatly combed side part and a brown satchel slung over one shoulder. His suit looked like something from a black and white movie, stiff and outdated, and his shoes were polished to a blinding shine. He didn't say much, just nodded once and walked right past the office toward room 112. That was Mr. Bannon's room, 8th grade social studies. Mr. Bannon had a stroke in the parking lot that morning, hit the pavement with a cup of coffee still in his hand. EMTs said he was lucky someone found him. By the time the paramedics had wheeled him out, most of the staff were scrambling to get a replacement, but they hadn't even sent out the request yet when the stranger walked in. No one questioned him. Not at first. He acted like he belonged, walked into room 112, dropped his satchel on the desk, and wrote his name on the board, Mr. Claver. The handwriting was sharp and perfect, the kind you'd see in old textbooks or those cursive posters that hang above the whiteboard. The kids didn't know what to make of him. He didn't take attendance, didn't ask anyone's name, just stood at the front of the class and said, "Today, we're going to learn about what really happened." No one knew what he meant, and he never explained. Instead of going over the day's scheduled lesson on Texas history, he started talking about things that weren't in any textbook. Ancient rituals buried in the desert. A town that once stood where the school was now, built in the 1800s by men who disappeared overnight. He told them the walls of the school were still listening and that they needed to stay very quiet. At first, the kids thought it was a joke, just a weird old man trying to make history interesting. But the longer he spoke, the colder the room got. It wasn't just in their heads. Multiple students later said it felt like the AC had kicked into overdrive, even though it was 84 degrees outside. Their breath fogged the air. The lights flickered. And Mr. Claver just smiled with those chalky, two white teeth. Some kids said he never blinked. Others said he blinked too much, rapid and twitchy, like something pretending to be human, but not quite getting the rhythm right. He called them by name, without asking. Not just their first names. He knew middle names, nicknames, even what some of them had called their childhood stuffed animals. When one kid, J.D. Alvarez, nervously asked how he knew, Mr. Claver smiled and said, "I've taught all of you before. Just not in this life." By lunch, the office had started receiving complaints. Kids were shaken. One girl left the classroom crying and wouldn't talk. Her hands were ice cold and trembling. When the vice principal went to check in, room 112 was empty. No teacher, no students, just 30 desks in perfect rows and a stack of handwritten papers on the teacher's desk, each sheet covered in identical looping cursive, repeating one phrase over and over. "We are the lesson. We are the lesson. We are the lesson." Then the fire alarm went off. The school was evacuated, but nobody could find the 30 students from Mr. Bannon's class. The other teachers swore they'd seen those kids walk into room 112 that morning. The cameras, every single hallway, cam, near that room, flickered into static for 27 minutes. When they came back on, room 112 was still empty. But here's the thing. The kids all turned up. Around 2:15 p.m., they were found wandering outside behind the football field, dazed and confused, with no memory of what happened between first period and that moment. Their clothes were slightly damp, like they'd been standing in fog. Every single one of them had a nosebleed, and none of them remembered Mr. Claver. The school district launched a full investigation. No one could find any record of the substitute. He wasn't in the system. No application, no background check, no ID badge. The name Mr. Claver didn't match any substitute in Travis County, or Texas, for that matter. The security team went through footage frame by frame. In one camera outside the east stairwell, for just 2 seconds, a pale figure in an old-fashioned suit can be seen walking upward, not up the stairs, up the wall, straight into the ceiling, and vanishing into the tiles like a drop of water, into a sponge. After that, no one ever taught in room 112 again. They tried, for a while, but every teacher who took that room got sick. One started hearing whispering during lessons. Another found a drawing on the whiteboard she hadn't written, an outline of a classroom full of desks, drawn in red marker that wouldn't wash off. At some point, the school locked the room for good. It's still there, behind a metal door at the end of the east wing, dusty, dark. And if you ever walk by on a quiet afternoon, just before dismissal, you might hear a whisper behind that door. Something slow, repeating, over and over, in perfect cursive, "We are the lesson." Red Oak, Texas wasn't on most maps anymore. Maybe it had been once, back when people still gave a damn about tiny towns that smelled like sunburnt hay and diesel. But now? Now it was just a dying patch of scrubland, halfway between nowhere and someplace you only drove through with the windows up. The kind of town where even the ghosts had packed up and left, except for the one that didn't. Red Oak Middle School stood at the end of a cracked county road, like something that had been forgotten by time. Built in the 1950s and patched up with cheap bricks and spit every decade since, it had the same sagging roof, same flickering lights, same moldy stench in the gym lockers. Parents called it historic. Kids just called it cursed. On the day it happened, October 27th, a gray Friday that felt colder than it had any right to be, most of the students had already checked out. Football that night. Halloween coming up. School was more of a holding pen than anything else. The morning started like it always did. The school bus wheezed like it had asthma. Principal Hensley yelled at a 6th grader for vaping in the bathroom, and Mrs. Carter took attendance in her 7th grade homeroom, room 112. Then, at exactly 10:17 a.m., the intercom clicked on. It was always a little scratchy, like it had been wired through a tin can. But this time, the static came first, long and slow, like someone dragging their fingernails across a chalkboard. Then the voice came. "This is a code red lockdown," said Principal Hensley, calm and hollow. "Teachers, lock your doors. This is not a drill." The students blinked, looked around. A few snickered. They were used to drills, used to the stiff routine of deadbolt turns and lights off. Mrs. Carter, a soft-voiced woman who always wore cardigans that smelled faintly of lavender, stood up and went to the door. She turned the lock, pulled the blinds, flipped off the light. The room dimmed to twilight. "Phones away," she said, because that was part of the drill too. But no one listened. Eli Thompson, the kind of kid who was already halfway to juvie in everyone's eyes, crept to the window and peeled back a sliver of the blind. "There's someone out there," he whispered. Mrs. Carter crossed the room, ready to scold him, but paused. There was someone out there, standing in the middle of the cracked blacktop of the recess yard, right where the old merry-go-round used to be before they tore it out after that 6th grader broke his arm last year. A girl, barefoot, wearing a pale, tattered dress that fluttered in the breeze, even though the air outside was dead still. Her hair hung in wet clumps around her shoulders, as if she'd just climbed out of a well. And her skin, it wasn't pale like a sick kid. It was wrong, translucent. Her veins looked like dark, inked spiderwebs stretched too tight. But the worst thing wasn't her bare feet or her soaked dress. It was the smile. She smiled like she knew them, like she was waiting for this moment. Mrs. Carter's breath caught in her throat. She shut the blinds. "We're staying put," she said. "Who the hell is that?" Eli asked, voice cracking just a little. "No talking," she snapped, sharper than she meant. For the next 10 minutes, the classroom sat in silence. But outside, the air got heavier. You could feel it, even through the cinder block walls. The temperature dropped. Phones started to lose signal. One by one, notifications failed to load. Then the classroom lights, even though they were already off, flickered once and buzzed like angry hornets. At 10:34 a.m., the intercom came on again. It was Principal Hensley, but it wasn't. The voice was wrong. "This is not a drill," it said. "This is not a drill. This is not a drill," over and over, on a loop. The voice getting slower each time, like a tape melting under the sun. Mrs. Carter pulled out her phone to call the office. No signal, just a black screen and the spinning icon of death. Then the door handle started to move, soft at first, just a jiggle, like someone checking it. Then a rattle, then something harder, shaking, pushing, scraping. "Everyone away from the door," Mrs. Carter said. "Now." The kids moved fast, ducking behind desks, crawling into corners. One girl, Katie, started to cry. Eli crouched next to the door, gripping a plastic chair leg like a weapon. There was a moment of pure, heart-hammering silence. Then they heard her voice from the hallway, singing, low, off-key, a child's voice, thick with something ancient and wet. "Ring around the rosy," someone screamed. It wasn't clear who. The classroom door creaked, even though it was locked. The metal bent inward, as if something on the other side was pushing it without using hands. The hinges groaned. Mrs. Carter grabbed her desk phone. Still dead. She turned to Eli. "There's an emergency escape route through the janitor's closet," she whispered. "Go now. Take the others." But he wasn't listening. He was staring at the window. The girl was back. Only now she was closer, right outside the glass. Her face pressed to the window, skin pulling against the pane. Her eyes were pure black. Not shadowed, not dark, just black. Like ink, like oil. And behind her, out on the blacktop, more were coming. More children, all barefoot, all soaked, all smiling. They came out of the woods, out of the air, out of nothing, and they were heading for the school. The last thing Eli remembered was the sound of the final bell ringing. Except it wasn't time for school to let out, and no one had touched the intercom. They found Mrs. Carter's classroom 3 days later. Police, sheriff's deputies, state troopers. Every door in the school was still locked. Not from the outside, but from within. It was like every room had sealed itself shut. The students were gone. No blood, no bodies, no signs of a struggle, just the faint, lingering smell of pond water. The only thing left behind in room 112 was a single chair facing the window. And in the dust on the glass, written in something sticky and black, were the words, "Recess is forever." They shut Red Oak Middle down after that, boarded it up, tore down the sign. Locals say if you drive past on a foggy morning, you can still hear the bell. You can still hear the singing. Some say the school was built over a flooded cemetery. Others whisper about drownings, forgotten children, things buried deep under the gym floor. But no one really knows what happened that day, except maybe the girl on the playground. And she's still smiling.